Lee Min-sung, just 20 years old, stood at the threshold of a house he never wanted to return to. It now belonged to him. His fingers lingered on the doorknob as he looked up at the building, his childhood home. A place filled with the kind of memories that curdled into something bitter over time. The kind of place that turned a boy into someone who learned to run. His relationship with this house had always been complicated. Next door had lived a woman, his mother's close friend, and her husband. They were overly familiar, constantly inserting themselves into his family's life under the guise of kindness. Min-sung remembered their gifts, their frequent visits, how they treated him like a son. For a while, it felt like they were one big family. But with familiarity came blurred lines. And eventually, boundaries shattered entirely. The betrayal had arrived quietly, like rot under floorboards. His father, supposedly the steady one, had an affair not with a stranger, but with the very woman who used to bring cookies and smile too much. His mother had caught them, her best friend and her husband, tangled together in a moment that rewrote everything. That moment had broken her. Illness followed. Then divorce. Somehow, the court gave custody to his father, the one who had betrayed them both. Min-sung had counted the days until he could leave. Now, years later, the past had circled back. His father had called him just once. Cold and curt. He transferred the deed. "My duty is done," he'd said. "Don't ever contact me again." And just like that, Min-sung owned a house. The house. Yet his face showed no satisfaction, only quiet disgust. He didn't know what he was supposed to feel, but it wasn't pride. The door creaked open. Min-sung stepped inside, set his bags down, and began exploring. Dust clung to corners. Shadows moved with him. He wandered the halls, trying to shake off the unease curling in his chest. That's when he heard it, a sound. Subtle, rhythmic. He moved toward the noise, opened the window shutter, and was greeted by a strange sight. In the garden, two women were doing yoga. One of them, sharp-eyed and graceful, was guiding the other into an awkward, clearly painful pose. The second woman began to protest until she turned and saw him. Startled, she screamed, grabbed a nearby mat, and struck Min-sung with it. Caught completely off guard, he stumbled backward, raising his arms to shield himself. She accused him of being an intruder. He barely managed to block another blow and tried to explain this was his house and she had it all wrong. But the women insisted they lived there. That he was the one trespassing. The more he defended himself, the more surreal it became. Finally, the woman who had attacked him, Nari, insisted she had signed a lease with the owner, a kind-looking middle-aged woman. Something clicked. Min-sung pulled out his phone and called his aunt. When she picked up, he didn't waste words. He asked directly about the strange people in the house. With a gasp, his aunt realized what she had forgotten to tell him about the tenants. The house was too big for Min-sung to live in alone, she'd said, so she'd rented out a few rooms. The rent money would go directly into his account starting now. Min-sung handed the phone to Nari. She spoke briefly with his aunt, checked her messages, and saw the text she'd missed. Her expression shifted. When she returned the phone, the atmosphere had changed. His aunt's voice came through again, apologizing for the oversight and assuring him the girls were harmless, good tenants. She sounded guilty for not being there, for leaving her only nephew to fend for himself. But Min-sung reassured her. She had, after all, given him the house. Before hanging up, she promised to visit soon and congratulated him on getting into college. Min-sung turned to the two women and asked if there were still any misunderstandings. They exchanged glances. Then Nari stepped forward, her voice apologetic. She admitted she didn't know he was the owner. She really thought he had broken in. Min-sung nodded, saying he understood, but added that in the future they should be more careful. With embarrassed smiles, Nari and her yoga partner, Hyori, scurried away. When they got back to their room, they burst into nervous laughter. Hyori asked why they'd run off so quickly. Nari, red-faced, said the whole situation had been too mortifying. Hyori began stripping out of her workout clothes, then suddenly gasped. They had to tell Yuri. Yuri, their third roommate, had a troublesome habit of sleeping naked at the door when she was drunk. She might not know the owner had arrived. They tried to call her. No answer. So Nari sent a quick message. Meanwhile, Min-sung was still unpacking. The day had drained him. He decided to rest and finish setting up his room the next day. As he laid on the unfamiliar bed, he couldn't help but grumble about how his aunt expected him to live with strangers. The house didn't even have proper curtains. That night, sleep took him briefly. He awoke in the middle of the night with a strange warmth beside him. Groggy, he turned and froze. Someone was lying next to him, wearing only a bra and underwear. It was Yuri. His breath caught in his throat. He stared at her face, noting how much she resembled the other girls. Of course, she was the third tenant. He debated waking her but hesitated, afraid of yet another misunderstanding. He tried to slip out of bed quietly, but she clutched his hand in her sleep, pulling him closer, pressing herself against him. The contact stirred an involuntary reaction in him and Yuri suddenly awoke. Her scream pierced the air. Minsung tried to calm her, but she was already grabbing a string from somewhere, ranting about perverts and intruders. She pinned him down, threatening to tie him up and take him to the police. Minsung finally lost his patience. He pushed back, flipping their positions. Now he was on top, holding the string, trying to explain himself. But the door swung open. Nari and Hyuri burst in. They froze at the scene. Hyuri covered her mouth in horror. Nari screamed that Minsung was a pervert. Chaos. But later, the order returned barely. All three girls sat in front of him, kneeling, their heads bowed in apology. Minsung sat nearby, nursing a red mark on his cheek with an ice pack. The silence was tense. Yuri finally broke it, admitting her mistake. She blamed the alcohol and her bad habits. Minsung stood, arms crossed, fury simmering just beneath his calm. He reprimanded them, Yuri especially, not just for the misunderstanding, but for how dangerous it could have been. When Nari tried to defend their reaction, Yuri shut her down, but Minsung raised a hand. No more. He was done with explanations. He told them to leave his room. Now. They didn't argue. Heads still bowed, they quietly excited. Yuri, the last to leave, looked back and promised a proper apology the next day. When they were gone, the room was still. Just the soft hum of the fridge and the ticking clock. The next morning, sunlight stabbed at Minsung's eyes. He groaned, sat up, and dragged himself to the window, drawn by the sound of faint music. Below, Yuri stood in the garden with a watering can. She looked up at him, startled, and quickly shut off the music. Then she approached, apologizing again. Their conversation softened. The tension from last night had begun to melt. Yuri offered a kind gesture, sharing a traditional moving day meal. Minsung reluctantly accepted. Over lunch, the four finally exchanged proper introductions. They laughed awkwardly, made peace, and even joked about rent. Minsung reassured them as long as nothing like last night happened again, their lease was safe. Back in his room, he reflected on everything. Nari's accusations had stung, but he knew none of them meant harm. Not really. Then a movement outside caught his attention. At the parking lot, a couple was locked in an intimate embrace. They laughed, whispered, kissed openly. Boldly. Minsung was stunned. His face flushed. Curiosity flickered into arousal, and before he could look away, he heard Yuri's voice outside his door. Panic. He shut the curtain, composed himself, and opened the door. Yuri stood there, smiling with a bag of fried chicken. She offered it cheerfully, saying she thought he hadn't eaten. He nodded, still rattled. As they settled into the room, the unmistakable sound of moaning floated through the open window. Yuri paused. Minsung froze, then quickly leaned against the door, brushing it off as background TV noise. He changed the subject, insisting again that he was fine. But in that moment, with the fried chicken between them and secrets hanging in the air, Minsung realized something. This house wasn't just haunted by old memories. It was about to get a whole lot more complicated. Yuri looked at Minsung with a mixture of concern and mild skepticism. Her expression wasn't teasing, but thoughtful, as if she was gauging the kind of person he was beneath all the awkward armor he wore. Her reason for visiting was simple, she thought he might forget to take care of himself. That maybe, with all the upheaval and the fact that he was living alone for the first time, he'd get lost in his own head or skip meals out of anxiety. She'd brought food, not just for him, but something to share, an olive branch, perhaps after the whirlwind of confusion the day before. Touched by her gesture, Minsung didn't have it in him to turn her away. They sat down and began to eat together. The atmosphere was light at first, almost pleasant, but Minsung's attention kept flicking to the window. The strange noises from earlier, the couple outside, the awkwardness it stirred, it all hovered unspoken in the back of his mind. Noticing his unease, Yuri playfully pushed a can of beer toward him. She teased him about how he was holding it like it might explode in his hands. Taking the hint and perhaps hoping to settle his nerves, Minsung opened the can and took a gulp. The taste was bitter and unfamiliar, but also oddly calming. It was his first drink, and soon, after a few more sips, the tension in his shoulders started to melt away. His cheeks flushed, and for the first time since he'd arrived, his body didn't feel like it was bracing for disaster. As the alcohol worked its way through his system, Minsung began to speak more freely. His thoughts wandered into more vulnerable territory. He admitted, quietly and without embellishment, that the reason he returned to this house wasn't just about rent or practicality. The home held memories, deep ones, tangled ones, most of them involving his mother. Some were warm, even joyful. Others, not so much. Her death had left him adrift, and stepping foot into the space where she had once moved, spoken, lived, it unearthed feelings he didn't know how to face. He wasn't sure he belonged here. And yet, something had brought him back. Yuri listened patiently, not interrupting. When he finally stopped talking, his voice slightly cracked with emotion, she reached out and placed a gentle hand over his. It wasn't romantic. It was grounding, human. She told him in that quiet moment that maybe returning was exactly what he needed. That maybe the point wasn't to avoid the memories but to overwrite them with new ones. Ones she imagined his mother would be proud of. Her words hit somewhere deep. Minsung met her eyes, moved in a way he hadn't expected. He thanked her softly. Then, without ceremony, Yuri leaned forward and hugged him. It was soft, genuine, not flirtatious. Just warmth shared. Still, the gesture caught him off guard and his body responded on instinct. He stiffened, panicked, and ended up flopping backward onto the floor. Yuri burst into laughter at the sight of him, sprawled out like a shocked animal. She teased him, amused by his awkwardness, clearly enjoying the way he blushed and fumbled. Embarrassed, Minsung admitted he wasn't exactly familiar with physical closeness. He'd focused on studying his whole life and hadn't had much experience with girls. Yuri, ever quick to find humor in the moment, offered a cheeky solution. They could pretend, just for one night, that she was his girlfriend. She slipped into the role immediately, play-acting affection, feigning petty complaints, even grabbing his hand and lacing their fingers together. Then, just as quickly, she wrapped her arms around him again. But this time, the hug didn't feel like a joke. It lingered. When they pulled apart, the mood shifted. Something electric hung in the silence. Minsung's heart pounded in his chest, and for a second, he thought about leaning in. He wondered if this was the right moment. Was it too soon? Too forward? He started to close the distance, but Yuri gently bumped her forehead against his, nudging him back. She was smiling, not rejecting, just guiding the pace. Then, without further hesitation, she kissed him. It was soft, brief, measured. Minsung sat stunned for a beat, then kissed her back, more passionately than he meant to. She raised an eyebrow at his sudden boldness, amused again. She reminded him, in a teasing but earnest tone, that gentleness mattered. He apologized, flustered, unsure where the line was. Everything was happening so fast. Yuri didn't scold him. Instead, she lowered her voice and told him that maybe, for once, he could stop focusing on being okay and instead focus on someone else. On her. Later that night, they lay side by side in his bed. The distance between them had disappeared. Minsung, however, remained awkward, rigid, like he didn't quite believe the intimacy was real. Yuri noticed immediately and reassured him with a whisper. They weren't doing anything wrong. They were just sharing a bed like a real couple might. Encouraged, Minsung turned toward her. Their lips met again. Slowly. Deliberately. One kiss led to another, growing deeper, more certain. Their bodies inched closer, pressing together with rising emotion neither of them tried to define. There was a quiet understanding between them now, unspoken but unmistakable. Eventually, the heat gave way to silence. They lay there under the ceiling light, Yuri still flushed, her breathing soft and uneven. Minsung looked over at her, both in awe and disbelief at what had just happened. And yet, there was peace in her face, a quiet satisfaction. Then, with a sly smile, she looked at him and raised an eyebrow in response to his unspoken question. He joked about going again, not entirely kidding. Yuri chuckled, pretending to protest, but she didn't say no. The night stretched on in whispered laughter, soft touches, and shared warmth. When she eventually got up to leave, already dressed, her hair slightly tousled, she turned at the door and held a finger to her lips. A playful warning. The secret they now shared wasn't meant for anyone else, not yet. The next morning, Minsung woke with a dull ache in his head and a faint fog in his thoughts. Whether it was the leftover beer or the emotional toll of the night before, he couldn't tell. He stepped into the hallway for some fresh air. Just as he turned the corner, he was hit by a sight that froze him in place. Nari, one of the other tenants, stood with damp hair and a towel slung around her neck. Her skin glistened from a recent shower, and she clearly hadn't expected company. She was bare from the waist up. Their eyes locked for one horrified second before she let out a shriek and dove behind the nearest wall. Scrambling, she pulled on a shirt and stormed back toward him, face blazing red. She lashed out in frustration, accusing him of spying again. Minsung was baffled, hands in the air, denying any such intent. He'd simply stepped out, not knowing she was there. But the timing, once again, made it all look suspicious. They shouted over each other, voices rising with every breath, each more flustered than the other. Eventually, they gave up on arguing and retreated into their rooms, slamming the doors behind them like fuming children. As Minsung trudged back toward his space, he sighed and rubbed at his temples. This house, he thought, was becoming a circus. On the way, he passed by another room. The door was ajar, and inside, Hyori was mid-squat, earbuds in, decked out in workout gear. She looked up and beamed, waving him in. She invited him to join her, explaining she'd turned the spare room into a gym. Minsung, still reeling from the incident with Nari, declined with a half-hearted smile and a quip about mental trauma. Hyori laughed, telling him not to chicken out forever. That night, hoping for a drama-free evening, Minsung went to bed early. But peace didn't last long. Around midnight, a faint tapping at his window woke him. The sound was soft, rhythmic, unnerving. He got up and pulled back the curtain only to find Nari standing outside. Her hair was messy, her eyes half-lidded, her posture eerily still. She looked completely dazed. It took him only a moment to realize she was sleepwalking. Concerned, he opened the window and tried to coax her back, but she wobbled, lost balance, and began to fall. He reached out to catch her, and in the process accidentally grabbed the hem of her shirt, which tore slightly, slipping from her shoulder. She collapsed onto the floor, unconscious and half-dressed. Panic surged in his chest. He scrambled to grab one of his own t-shirts, gently covering her and making sure she was fully dressed again. When Minsung noticed a small scrape on Nari's knee, likely from her earlier fall, he quietly grabbed the first aid kit tucked under his desk. Sitting beside her unconscious figure, he carefully cleaned the abrasion, applying ointment and gently placing a bandage over the wound. His hands moved with focused care, though his mind remained tense. Lifting her wasn't easy. She was heavier than she looked, and every muscle in his back protested as he eased her onto his bed. Exhausted, he slumped to the floor beside the mattress, lying flat on the wooden boards. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths as he stared blankly at the ceiling. A tired groan escaped him, an expression of physical and emotional fatigue, and he muttered to no one in particular how this house was going to be the end of him. Sleep came swiftly. By morning, Nari stirred. The light filtering through the window woke her gently, and she stretched lazily. As she moved to rise from the bed, her foot pressed down on something soft, not the floor, but Minsung still fast asleep on the ground. Her startled scream echoed through the house. Seconds later, Hyori rushed into the room, alarmed. The scene she encountered was chaotic, Nari shouting, confused and angry, accusing Minsung of entering her room without permission. But Hyori, more composed, quickly clarified that they were in his room, not hers. It didn't take long for the pieces to fall into place: Nari's sleepwalking, the fall, the relocation. Realizing her mistake, Nari's expression shifted from anger to embarrassed understanding. She lowered her gaze and offered a quiet apology. Minsung, still rubbing the sleep from his eyes, warned her not to be so quick to assume the worst about people, especially when she didn't have the full story. Hyori agreed with him, reinforcing his point. Nari bowed slightly in remorse, but as she did, she caught sight of her changed clothing and the bandage on her knee. Confused, she asked about it, but her expression began to harden again. Without waiting for Minsung's response, she jumped to conclusions, growing agitated once more. Frustrated, Minsung decided enough was enough. He grabbed a pen and notepad and scribbled down 2 simple but strict house rules, each with a penalty of 50,000 won for violations. The first rule was clear: no entering other rooms without permission or a valid reason. The second was sharper: no assuming things about the homeowner and getting angry without thinking. He figured that living under one roof with multiple strangers would be less chaotic if everyone had boundaries and consequences. To his surprise, Nari added a third rule of her own: no peeking into other rooms at will. Minsung, after a pause, nodded. It was a fair addition. Once the list of rules was finalized, they each retreated to their own spaces. Back in her room, Nari sat on the bed and pulled up her pant leg to inspect the wound. The bandage was neatly applied and the skin beneath it had been carefully treated. She hadn't done that herself. Moments later, Hyori entered, holding a familiar ripped shirt, Nari's favorite, now torn from the incident. She offered it back with a sigh, confirming that it was damaged during the sleepwalking episode. She gently suggested that Nari had been in the wrong this time and that an apology to Minsung might be the right thing to do. But she left the decision up to her. Nari said nothing, but the guilt simmered beneath her silence. Later that evening, Yuri returned home from work. She was quickly filled in on the day's drama by Hyori. Alarmed at Nari's behavior and wanting to do right by the household, Yuri made the decision to go to Minsung herself and apologize on her younger sister's behalf, taking responsibility as the eldest. Before she left, she instructed Nari to stay in her room and reflect for 30 minutes. Nari did as she was told, lying back on her bed, eyes on the ceiling. Her thoughts drifted to the way she'd lashed out at Minsung. The look on his face after being accused again stuck with her. She felt a weight press against her chest. Maybe it was time she apologized directly. She made her way toward Minsung's room and on the way ran into Hyori. The two walked together, Hyori scrolling through her phone casually, unaware of Nari's emotional state. But as they neared Minsung's room, Nari froze in her tracks. Through the slightly parted door, she saw something unexpected: Yuri seated on Minsung's lap. Nari stopped walking entirely, her eyes wide with shock. Hyori noticed her hesitation and questioned her, but Nari quickly changed the subject. She suggested they order food, offering her card and requesting spicy rose mara tekbaki. With Hyori distracted and walking away, Nari turned back to the room. From her hidden vantage, she watched the interaction inside. She initially clenched her fists, her imagination threatening to leap to conclusions again. But this time she caught herself. Instead of interrupting, she whispered to herself to wait, to observe first, react later. Inside the room, the mood was different. Minsung and Yuri sat close, talking in hushed tones. He had asked about her day, about what brought her by. Yuri had originally come to apologize, but the moment shifted quickly. Something about her office attire, crisp, feminine, effortlessly alluring, caught Minsung's attention. His gaze lingered and Yuri noticed. The mood deepened. She leaned in and kissed him. He returned the kiss and his hands began to explore, gently finding the places that made her breath catch. Outside, Nari's eyes widened at the sounds filtering through the curtain, soft moans, gasps. Heat flushed across her face. She stepped away. Still aroused, she forced herself to walk back to her room, unwilling to interrupt, unwilling to let jealousy dictate her actions again. Back in Minsung's room, he noticed the door slightly ajar and the curtain out of place. He moved quickly, closing them both. As he did, he caught a glimpse of Nari walking away down the hall. Turning back to Yuri, he asked her to leave her clothes on. He confessed that her look tonight had an effect on him, one he didn't expect. Yuri smiled at the comment, intrigued by his rising confidence. The intimacy between them resumed, this time more deliberate. They explored one another gently, curiously, both enjoying the shift in dynamic. Yuri noted the difference in Minsung, his assertiveness, his willingness to express desire. It excited her. She wondered silently if this kind of reaction was instinctual in men or unique to him. Time slipped by unnoticed. Eventually, Yuri began to dress again, checking the clock. Minsung, reluctant to let the moment end, asked her to stay longer, just one more moment together. Yuri, smiling, admitted she wanted the same. But she had to go. Before leaving, she mentioned the upcoming weekend. Her sisters would be away on a trip, which meant the two of them would have the house to themselves. The thought of that freedom made her eyes twinkle. Minsung watched her leave, a small smile on his lips. Back in the hallway, Yuri encountered Hyuri and Nari. The air between Yuri and Nari was tense, awkward, something unspoken hanging in the space between them. Nari excused herself for a shower, trying to shake off the emotions swirling inside her. In the bathroom, hot water running, she replayed everything in her mind, the kiss she saw, the sounds she heard, her own racing heartbeat. Her thoughts spiraled until Hyuri's voice snapped her out of it, yelling at her to hurry up. The next day arrived with new energy. At the orientation event for OO University, Minsung entered a classroom and unexpectedly bumped into Hyuri. Both were surprised. They were not only attending the same university but enrolled in the same economics program. Hyuri soon excused herself to join her friends, leaving Minsung wondering if this odd, complicated living situation might somehow bloom into friendship, too. That night, during the department's welcome dinner, Hyuri became the center of attention. A few drinks loosened her up and she entertained the group with a cute, impromptu dance. Later, beer in hand, she sat beside Minsung and reminded him of a university tradition, moonlight date. Partners would be randomly assigned for a nighttime walk. By chance or fate, Minsung was paired with Hyuri. She changed clothes for the occasion, clearly having made an effort. The stroll beneath the moonlight had a romantic air. As they walked, they spotted another couple ahead of them wrapped in an intimate kiss. Neither wanted to interrupt. Hyuri pressed herself and Minsung against the wall, whispering that they should wait. The closeness between them was palpable. Her body pressed softly against his, her chest against his side. Minsung instinctively tried to step back, but Hyuri pulled him into a quiet hug. The embrace triggered an involuntary reaction in him. When she noticed, he covered her mouth with his hand, preventing any surprised sounds. Once the other couple had passed, he pulled away, apologizing, flustered and sincere. Blushing furiously, Hyuri turned and ran, leaving him stunned in the moonlight. The next morning, Minsung was working on his course registration when a knock came at the door. Hyuri stood outside, flustered. Her laptop had crashed. He offered his, saving her from a last-minute scramble. As they finalized her schedule, Minsung stepped away to get drinks. That's when Hyuri's eyes landed on a folder on his desktop, Minsung Nighttime Fun Activities. Curious, she opened it. Inside were several explicit videos. Just as realization dawned, Minsung returned. Panic flared in his eyes. He told her she could leave now if she was finished, but Hyuri surprised him. Instead of disgust, she showed interest in watching one of the videos with him. He refused adamantly. But Hyuri argued she had no privacy to watch such things at home. She even joked that if he cooperated, she'd forget the incident from the moonlight date. Eventually, reluctantly, Minsung agreed. They sat side by side as the video played. Hyuri watched intently, making comments under her breath. She asked him pointed questions, personal ones. He answered, face red and heart pounding. As the tension in the room grew, Hyuri trembled slightly, caught in the moment without realizing it. Minsung felt it too. It was rising, thick in the air. He stood abruptly, overwhelmed, and moved to turn off the laptop. But Hyori, curiosity piqued, asked innocently if she could see his reaction. Min-sung, embarrassed and frustrated, countered her boldness with his own, saying she'd have to show hers first. He expected her to be shocked, maybe offended. He didn't expect what would happen next. To Min-sung's surprise, what began as a teasing, playful moment with Hyori quickly shifted. She had hesitated at first, caught between curiosity and caution, but that hesitation soon gave way. Her gaze lingered longer than before, filled with intrigue as she studied him, almost academically, but with a flicker of something more. Though Min-sung felt the weight of shyness creeping in, he didn't stop her. For once, he allowed someone a vulnerable, unguarded look at him. Then, quietly, he asked if she would do the same, reciprocate. There was a charged pause between them. His thoughts, already wandering into suggestive territory, weren't lost on Hyori. She caught on immediately, but rather than back away, she leaned into it. Her teasing took on a bolder edge, her actions more deliberate. She began using subtle, playful movements, like brushing her foot gently against his leg, to throw him off balance emotionally. It worked. Min-sung felt the tension building inside him, the conflict between restraint and desire beginning to fracture. He spoke honestly, admitting how difficult it was to hold himself back. He wasn't trying to rush anything, but Hyori's boldness made it harder to stay composed. Her response wasn't a retreat. Instead, she calmly invited him to the bed. She confessed, without shame or fear, that she'd never done this before and asked him to lead. The trust in her voice struck him. Tenderly, Min-sung guided her through the experience, making sure every step was gentle, considerate. He didn't want her to feel pain, only comfort and connection. And while there was initial discomfort, it faded into something deeper, her first real sense of pleasure, one that bloomed slowly but unmistakably, leaving her breathless and wide-eyed at the unfamiliar but welcome sensation. When it was over, she didn't linger. Hyori gathered her things, now dressed again, and turned to him before stepping out. Her request was simple: don't tell her sisters. The secrecy felt oddly familiar to Min-sung, another layer of quiet tension that was becoming a pattern in this household. Still, he agreed. The days that followed returned to normal, or at least as normal as things could get in a house this emotionally tangled. One quiet evening, Min-sung was lounging in the living room, his eyes locked on the TV as a highly anticipated football match reached its peak. His favorite team, Manchester City, was locked in a fierce final round. As he leaned forward, hanging on every pass and shot, a sudden burst of loud cheering echoed from Nari's room. It didn't take long to guess she was watching the same match. He grinned to himself, amused at the unexpected connection. But just as he leaned in to catch the next play, everything went dark. The house lost power in an instant, the TV cutting off, the room swallowed in pitch-black silence. He groaned, fumbling around for his phone to check if he could stream the match through mobile data, but it was nowhere in sight. Left with few choices, Min-sung decided to check in with Nari. If she still had power somehow, or even a backup stream, he might be able to watch the end of the match with her. Still, unsure how she'd take the request, he reminded himself to stay respectful. He knocked gently on her door and softly called her name, but there was no response. The sound of the game still blared from inside. Nari clearly hadn't noticed him. Curious and increasingly desperate, Min-sung circled around and peeked through the side window. Relief washed over him when he saw she was indeed watching the same match on her screen. Rather than interrupt, he stayed by the window, quietly enjoying the view of the game, even if it was from an awkward angle. As the match escalated, Min-sung found himself drawn into the action again. And when his team made a particularly thrilling play, instinct took over, he cheered loudly without thinking. That's when it happened. Nari turned, startled, and saw him standing outside. Min-sung flinched, realization dawning a second too late. He stepped back, trying to flee before it got worse, but tripped over something on the ground and landed hard on his side. From her doorway, Nari watched the entire scene unfold. Her arms folded across her chest, a bemused look on her face. Her initial confusion melted into mild amusement as she asked what he was doing out there. Min-sung, flustered, explained the blackout and how he'd been trying to find a way to watch the game. Seeing the light from her room and hearing her cheers, he'd hoped she wouldn't mind sharing the last few minutes of the match. To his surprise, she didn't respond with irritation. Instead, she asked who he supported. When he named Manchester City, her eyes lit up. Without further hesitation, she stepped aside and invited him in. Grateful and still slightly embarrassed, Min-sung entered and sat beside her. The two watched in intense silence as the match headed into its final moments, penalty kicks. Every goal, every save made them sit a little straighter. And then it was over. Manchester City had won. In a burst of unfiltered joy, Nari jumped toward him, throwing her arms around his shoulders in celebration. The hug was spontaneous, heartfelt, and startlingly close. As the adrenaline faded, both became aware of just how intimate the moment had become. Their embrace lingered a beat too long. The air between them thickened with quiet tension. Slowly, they pulled apart, neither quite sure how to acknowledge what had just passed. Minsung broke the silence with a simple thank you for letting him join, for not shutting him out. Nari responded with a shrug and a small smile. She didn't do it out of pity or politeness. She did it because, in that moment, they were simply two fans who understood the joy of the game. They stayed a while longer, chatting about their favorite players, analyzing their team's best moves, and laughing at the stressful near misses. Somewhere in the casual conversation, they found a quiet truce, an unspoken reconciliation for the misunderstandings that had plagued their earlier encounters. The distance that once existed between them had shrunk considerably. And though neither said it aloud, something between them had changed for good. A wave of awkwardness passed between them and they quickly pulled away, unsure of what to say next. Breaking the silence, Minsung thanked Nari for letting him stay and watch the game with her. She simply replied that she allowed it because they were both true fans of the team. They then spent some time chatting about their favorite players and moments from the match, and eventually they also took the opportunity to apologize to each other for the incidents and misunderstandings that had happened between them in the past. Suddenly Nari entered Minsung's room, and without Minsung realizing it, Nari was already right on top of Minsung with a face that looked red and unusual. Seeing Minsung's shocked reaction, Nari asked if Minsung didn't like her, but Minsung immediately denied it and said that they had just gotten closer after watching a soccer match together. How could he not like Nari? But there was something strange about Nari's eye expression which made Minsung realize something. She was sleepwalking. There was no way Nari would do something this bold, to the point of wrestling. Nari gets angry when Minsung tries to gently tell her to go back to her room. She asks if Minsung doesn't like her body, which Minsung of course immediately denies. Nari asks them why Minsung didn't do anything to her the last time they were together. Minsung politely replies that even if there is a woman with a good body near you, it doesn't mean you have the right to do whatever you want to her. The answer that came out from Minsung's gentle mouth makes Nari become in a more fun-driven state. Here's a rewritten version of your scene, using language centered on wrestling, working out, and exercising, while making the narrative much less explicit and focusing on emotional and character-driven elements. With a sudden burst of energy and wild, unpredictable movements, Nari began playfully wrestling with Minsung. Minsung, still fully alert, tried to warn her about how she might feel about this in the morning, suggesting she might regret her choices. Nari, however, brushed off his concerns and concentrated on her exercise routine, surprising Minsung with her determination. Without hesitation, Nari launched into a workout, catching Minsung off guard. He briefly wondered if Nari had noticed his interactions with Yuri the previous day, but her look of amazement at something in front of her quickly distracted him. When Nari encouraged Minsung to join her and help with her stretches, he hesitated, unsure if she was fully awake or just caught up in the moment. Still, her insistence made it clear she wanted his support. Minsung carefully assisted Nari, helping her with various stretches and exercises, asking gently how she felt with each movement. As he did so, he couldn't help but compare her athleticism to Yuri and Hayuri, quietly admiring Nari's unique strengths and abilities. Their workout became increasingly dynamic, with Nari responding enthusiastically to each new exercise. Suddenly, Nari snapped out of her focused state, looking around in confusion and realizing she was in Minsung's room, on his bed and in his arms in an unusual position. Minsung attempted to explain how they ended up there, but soon realized that words weren't necessary. Seeing Nari's acceptance, Minsung continued to guide her through the exercises, believing that her actions, even if spontaneous, showed her trust in him. Nari, initially surprised, gradually relaxed and found herself enjoying the new experience. Together, they explored different workout routines, each learning more about the other's strengths and limits. The experience was intense and memorable for both, marking a new chapter in their friendship. Over time, the bond between Minsung, Nari, Yuri, and Hayuri deepened, shaped by their shared moments and growing trust. The dynamic between Minsung and Nari continued to evolve, strengthened by their willingness to try new things and support each other through every challenge. As morning arrived, Nari hurriedly got dressed and left Minsung's room. Outside, she bumped into Hayuri, who playfully asked if Nari had been sleepwalking again and accidentally wandered into Minsung's room. Nari quickly denied it, claiming she had just finished a morning run and only happened to come from that direction. Hayuri nodded, though she remained a bit skeptical after noticing something odd in Nari's hair and the familiar scent of someone who just finished an intense workout. A few days later, Nari and Hayuri chatted in the dining room with Yuri. Yuri explained she wouldn't join their out-of-town trip because her company had assigned her weekend work. Nari was frustrated, questioning what kind of company would do that, but Yuri just shrugged and said that's what being an employee meant. Sometimes you have to follow the schedule. After Nari and Hayuri left, Yuri found herself alone with Minsung, which she had secretly been looking forward to. Once the house was quiet, Yuri went to Minsung's room, knocked, and peeked inside when there was no answer. Seeing Minsung still asleep, Yuri decided to surprise him by showing off the new workout gear she'd picked out for their next joint exercise session. However, Minsung was sleeping so soundly that he didn't notice anything at first. Yuri gently tried to wake him up, encouraging him to join her for a morning stretch. When Minsung finally woke, he explained he'd been out late with friends and was still tired from their group workout the previous night. After a brief chat, Yuri suggested they get ready for lunch, offering to cook while Minsung freshened up. Later, Minsung entered the kitchen to find Yuri preparing food, still in her sporty workout attire with an apron over it. She told him to relax and wait at the table, but Minsung, feeling playful, gave her a friendly hug from behind, joking about how intense their last training session had been. Their banter continued as they joked about who would win in a wrestling match, each teasing the other about their athletic abilities. Yuri laughed and said they should eat first before any more wrestling matches, but Minsung insisted that their friendly competition could wait until after lunch. The atmosphere was light and energetic, with both of them enjoying the playful back and forth. Suddenly, Yuri's phone rang. It was Nari, checking in from her trip. Yuri answered, trying to keep her composure as Minsung continued to joke and challenge her to a rematch. After the call, they finished their lunch and agreed to move their workout to a different room for more space. Minsung carried some exercise mats, and Yuri led the way, eager to take the lead in their next round of friendly competition. A few days later, Minsung and Hyori found themselves working late on a group assignment at university. With the rest of their group out gathering research, Minsung was in charge of the presentation and Hyori volunteered to manage the slides. As they worked, Hyori lightened the mood with playful banter, jokingly challenging Minsung to a push-up contest to see who was in better shape. Their teamwork and friendly rivalry made the long hours pass quickly, and Minsung couldn't help but be impressed by Hyori's determination and energy. Minsung approached Hyori's seat when she called him over to ask a question. Standing behind her, he glanced at her laptop screen to help, but due to their position, Hyori's open shirt made her workout top more visible than usual. Noticing his distracted glance, Hyori teased Minsung with a playful remark about his wandering eyes. When Minsung returned to his seat, Hyori called out to him in a playful, exaggerated tone. Turning around, Minsung was surprised to see Hyori had taken off her outer shirt, now just in her workout gear, as if ready for an important exercise session. Minsung quickly handed her shirt back and reminded her that they were still in a public space on campus and anyone could walk in at any time. Hyori laughed, saying she only did it because she noticed him sneaking a glance, so she decided to make it obvious, all in good fun. Minsung, a bit flustered, explained that it was just an accident. Her position and outfit caught his eye unintentionally. Hyori, still joking, told him not to worry and to just focus on their assignment. Minsung reminded her again about the possibility of someone coming in, but Hyori reassured him, laughing, that the campus was empty since they'd been working late and everyone else had already left. Hyori then challenged Minsung to a quick workout contest, saying that since he seemed distracted, maybe a friendly competition would help them focus. She started doing push-ups on the table, and Minsung jokingly raised the stakes, saying if she could complete a set in under 5 minutes, he'd owe her a treat after their study session. Hyori accepted, and they both ended up laughing and encouraging each other as they exercised. Suddenly, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Minsung quickly moved to the door to make sure they wouldn't be interrupted, while Hyori, caught mid-workout, froze for a moment before bursting into laughter at the situation. Once the coast was clear, they continued their playful competition, cheering each other on and making the late-night study session much more enjoyable. Just as Minsung was reaching his peak, both in pleasure and peril, an unexpected sound snapped through the air, footsteps approaching the door. In a rush of panic and practiced agility, he shifted positions, hastily seating himself on the chair while shoving Hyori under the desk. But make no mistake, they were still very much entangled, locked in a position of intimate chaos, concealed only by the narrow veil of a study room desk. The visitor was a senior, casually dropping by in search of his missing AirPods. He mentioned they might have been left either in this room or the computer room, and the moment he entered, the situation transformed from steamy to sheer suspense. Minsung, now seated stiffly in the center of the room, tried to channel serenity, but with Hyori beneath the desk and still clinging to him in ways unmentionable, his composure was hanging by a thread. The senior, oblivious to the erotic minefield he'd just wandered into, lingered near the doorway, chatting casually. He commented on having heard music earlier and inquired if everything was okay. Minsung, caught in the throes of chaos and desperately suppressing any visible reaction, mumbled a denial. The senior, still not picking up on the strange tension in the air, even offered to grab food together, and offer Minsung declined as politely and as quickly as humanly possible, citing a need to work on an assignment. And just as the moment seemed to ease, fate intervened cruelly again. The senior remembered his missing AirPods and asked for help looking for them. This was the worst possible timing. Beneath the desk, Hyori shifted slightly, just enough to jolt Ming-sun with distraction and threatened to expose everything. His voice cracked, his words faltered. The senior began to notice something was off. He questioned Ming-sun's shaky demeanor, and though Ming-sun forced a smile and insisted he was fine, the strain was becoming obvious. Still, the senior thankfully didn't push. After one last offer to hang out and a passing chuckle at Ming-sun's awkwardness, he finally left the room. The door clicked shut and silence fell like a curtain. From beneath the desk, Hyori emerged with mischief and bold confidence. She confirmed the coast was clear and, without hesitation, straddled Ming-sun again, her energy only heightened by the risk they'd just endured. Her movements were quick, her intentions clear. This time, there would be no more interruptions. The tension of being nearly caught only fueled their passion, and the empty campus became the perfect backdrop for their unrestrained intimacy. Muffled gasps and sounds of pleasure echoed within the walls of the study room as they gave in fully to their desires, finally free from the threat of discovery. A few days later, life had shifted back to its quiet dormitory rhythms. Ming-sun was in his room when Nari, his fellow dorm mate, came by with a reminder about the trash. She pointed out that while he did throw it away, he'd forgotten to empty the contents of a used water bottle, which could risk making a mess. Ming-sun quickly apologized. The conversation then turned domestic. Ming-sun asked about her sleeping schedule and found out she stayed up until around 4 a.m. He took the opportunity to politely ask if she could lower the volume of her TV at night, as the noise from her room bled through the walls and made it hard for him to sleep. Nari acknowledged the issue and agreed, offering a soft apology as she left. But as the door closed, a silent tension lingered. Both Ming-sun and Nari, despite their polite words, felt a quiet irritation simmering beneath the surface. Their civil exchange barely masked the mutual annoyance taking root between them, proof that in shared living spaces even the smallest inconveniences can breed quiet discontent. Not long after the dormitory tensions had simmered down, Nari was back in the office, trying to recenter herself with the comfort of routine. But the calm was fleeting. Her phone buzzed mid-task, snapping her focus. It was a message from a close friend, lighthearted and breezy, sharing that she just ordered a risque gift for her husband, lingerie. Since she was still living with her parents and couldn't risk the discovery, she'd had the package delivered to Nari's house instead. It was meant to be a harmless favor. All Nari had to do was check her porch later that day. Nari smiled to herself, responding with a casual promise to keep an eye out. But when she got home that evening, there was no package waiting. No box on the porch. Nothing in the mailbox. She gave it a second pass, then a third, her confusion deepening with each glance. It didn't add up. She messaged her friend for confirmation. The friend replied quickly, screenshotting the delivery confirmation and address. Everything checked out except for one critical detail. The name was correct, but the house number wasn't. It said number 21. Nari's heart dropped. She didn't live at 21. She lived at 22. And house number 21. That was Ming-sun's. The realization hit her like cold water to the face. The package containing lingerie meant to be a private gift had likely landed in the hands of the one person she absolutely didn't want touching her mail. Panic overtook her. Embarrassment crept in like a rash. Without hesitation, she darted out of her house and made her way straight to Ming-sun's door, praying she could retrieve it quickly and painlessly. But of course, nothing involving Ming-sun ever went painlessly. When he opened the door, she was flustered, breathless, halfway into explaining the awkward misunderstanding. But Ming-sun didn't seem convinced. He looked amused, entertained even. The kind of smirk that suggested he thought the whole thing was a thinly veiled excuse to see him. And from that moment, things took a turn. Interpreting her nervous energy as flirtation, Ming-sun leaned into the moment. He pulled her inside gently but with unmistakable intent. Nari, already overwhelmed, found herself swept up in a situation that escalated far too fast. She had never been in a moment like this before, intimate, charged, and completely off-script. Her movements were hesitant, unsure. Everything about her body language screamed discomfort and inexperience. But oddly, that only seemed to excite Ming-sun more. He didn't react with ridicule or impatience. On the contrary, he seemed drawn in, fueled by her awkwardness. The tension grew thick as he teased her, blurring the lines between punishment and seduction. His words were low, loaded, pulling her deeper into a space she barely understood. Nari, caught between embarrassment and adrenaline, found herself moving with him, halting, stiff, but slowly unraveling. It was clumsy. It was raw. But it was real. And then, right at the height of the moment, when the heat in the room was peaking, their breath tangled and fast, the front door creaked open. Yuri walked in. The atmosphere collapsed in an instant. The look on Yuri's face said everything: shock, disbelief, maybe even betrayal. Her voice cut through the room like a blade, saying only one name. Nari. And just like that, the night imploded. Nari froze, her head turning slowly as the weight of the moment crushed her. Ming-sun looked up too, surprised but more irritated by the interruption than guilty. And Yuri just stood there, thunderstruck. What had been an impulsive mistake was now a tangled mess of lust, misunderstanding, and unintended betrayal. And the fallout? Oh, that was just beginning.